The IMF lifts global growth forecast for 2025-2026. US goods trade deficit narrows by 10.8% in June. And Poland and the Czech Republic anticipate an economic hit from new US tariffs. Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching Q News, and this is the Economic Bulletin with me, Henny Saif. We'll start off with the global economy, as the 2025 State of Food Security and Nutrition Report has shown that global hunger dropped for the second straight year, with 15 million fewer people affected in 2024 than in 2023. Still, from 638 to 720 million people, representing about 8.2% of the population, faced hunger. Progress was led by South and Southeast Asia and South America. Yet crises persist. Africa and Western Asia saw worsening food insecurity, with Gaza's catastrophic hunger levels doubling to 1.1 million people. By 2030, 512 million may still suffer hunger, 60% in Africa. The report urges policies like social protections, agri-food, research and infrastructure investment to curb inflation's impact. The International Monetary Fund has slightly increased its global growth forecast, now projecting 3% for 2025 and 3.1% for 2026. Citing stronger than expected demand ahead of new U.S. tariffs and a drop in the average U.S. tariff rate from 24.4% to 17.3%. The IMF cautions that potential rebounds in tariff rates, geopolitical tensions, and large fiscal deficits could tighten global financial conditions. While front-loading of purchases temporarily boosts activity, this effect will likely fade, slowing growth in late 2025 and 2026. Regional forecasts include U.S. growth at 1.9% in 2025, Euro area at 1% in 2025, and China at 4.2% in 2026. Global inflation is expected to fall to 4.2% in 2024 and 3.6% in 2026, though U.S. inflation may remain elevated. Furthermore, the International Monetary Fund has issued a stern warning that any loss of central bank independence risks triggering financial, monetary and macroeconomic instability by undermining efforts to control inflation. The IMF emphasized the critical need to safeguard central bank autonomy, especially amidst prolonged trade tensions and tariff uncertainty. The global lender underscored the importance of clear messaging and protecting independence, not only in legal terms, but also in practice. The warning comes as the U.S. Federal Reserve faces repeated calls from President Donald Trump to cut interest rates. And for further analysis, we are joined from London by the CEO of QW Capital, Mr. Gianluca Lobifallo. Mr. Lobifallo, welcome to the Q News Economic Bulletin. Now, given the IMF's recent upward revision to global growth forecast for 2025 and 2026, what are the key factors driving this improved outlook, and what risks could still derail the projected growth trajectory?
Yes, good evening, everybody. In reality, on the forecast of the IMF, what is really relevant is they remark that at the moment we are seeing an uploaded of the most of the countries, so kind of front running the increase of tariffs. So most of the approvisionment for the new season has been put forward by many companies. So there's been an increase in storage simply because most companies wanted to again front running the eventual increase in tariff, and so this number has been affected. But also the production over the last quarter has been affected by this front running. Now we have to see if we, as we expected, considering that the last few days good news on the trade deal agreement with Japan, actually a week before we had UK, Japan, and Europe, and Vietnam before. So we have seen that in reality, many trade deals has been kind of settled, assuming that nothing will change. Obviously, with the current US administration, we cannot rule out that there will be another opening for a new phase of negotiation. But let's assume that the deal that's been struck during the last few days hold. At least we now have certainty of what the tariff will be. If they are what they are now, frankly, is better than what people were concerned about. And we can now at least plan industrial production and trade volume and forecast what will be the impact, because we have kind of certainty at least on the tariff. If this is the case, actually, the IMF forecast that kept the rate at 3% of growth for next year, 3.1 for the following year, 2026, in reality are kind of saying that the economy is kind of stable. So it's a good news.
Yes. Well, the IMF also warned that undermining central bank independence could trigger macroeconomic instability. What are the main risks if central banks' policy decisions become subject to political influence?
Yeah, this is a disaster. We have cases in the past. The most recent one was, as everybody may remember, what happened in Turkey only 2 years ago. Clearly, Turkey is not US, and I'm sure we won't have such level of interference, but definitely central bank independence is one of the backbone of our capitalism, our financial market. So is something that we cannot even think about the implication would be. Is actually true, if we want to be very honest, over the recent path after the global financial crisis, great financial crisis, we clearly had some cases in which some central bank, particularly the Fed, was definitely not necessarily very politically independent. If I think about some period after 2012, during the Bernanke administration, it was clearly less independent than what we were expecting to, and we are paying the price now. We excess liquidity in the market, excess intervention by the Fed, and that is already kind of give a glitch of what would be a non-independent central bank.
Well, the IMF also stressed the need to protect central bank independence, not only in legal terms, but also in practice. In your opinion, what distinguishes the legal independence from practical day-to-day autonomy, and why are both necessary?
Yeah, the legal independence is a given, but you are pointing out something very important. We are not discussing here the legal independence that is proven for example, in the US has been stated by the Federal Act that it was established in 1913. So we're not questioning the legal independence. It's the market independence, and that will imply the market credibility of central bank. Now, this is clear stated again in the Fed Act that established the Federal Reserve System, and we have to guarantee that the reason why the Fed got two mandates, or in other cases of like ECB or Bank of England or Bank of Japan, they got one mandate, is because central bank need to have a clear mandate, so that's guaranteed their independence. If they have different mandate and not very clear mandate, they will be very inclined to be politically influenced. So when a central bank like the Fed has two mandates, has to keep the inflation in the area of the 2%, and then has to kind of support growth and financial stability, we clearly know what their target is. In the case of the Fed at the moment, the Fed is sticking with his mandate, is respecting his mandate. So whatever the administration can say, the Fed is in the mode. At the moment, inflation is approaching 3%. According to the Fed forecast, we are going towards a 3.1% at the end of the year. And according to a very new established indicator by the Financial Times in London that is proving to be more accurate, paradoxically, than the Fed, we are actually seeing the inflation in the US, the CPI at the end of the year, to be 3.4. So with this number, the Fed has to be on hold. If anything, we should question the cut they did in September last year of 50 basis points. There was definitely no warranted. Inflation was still sustained, was not crashing. Growth was evident. So that's, to me, was a question mark. I love the Powell administration. I think it's been the best Fed run since Volcker, for sure. The only question I have is why they did this jumbo cut in September, followed by other two cuts of 25 basis points. They were not warranted.
Mr. Lo Befalo, how do heightened trade tensions and the uncertainty around tariffs complicate the job of central banks? Can political calls for rate cuts or hikes in response to such external shocks threaten the institution's ability to meet its mandate?
I mean, yes, absolutely. In a nutshell, yes. But that is one of the reasons, one of the variables that can influence inflation and growth. So now we talk about tariff, but there could be a recession, there could be a financial crisis like we had in 2008. That is the job of central bank. So what you are mentioning are at the moment the tension that are on the market because of policy specifically by the US administration. But bear in mind that we have to be clear, and it's becoming clear over the last few days, the tariff was not a policy, but was a tool to negotiate on their fiscal deficit and on the funding on their debt. Don't forget that they need to refund $7 trillion by the end of the year, and including the first semester of next year is $9 trillion. It's a huge amount of debt. So it's obvious that the US, the government, is trying to do anything to reduce the cost of this refinancing. That would be interest rate. But it's not. I don't think the right approach is to push the Fed to cut rates, even because the Fed would cut the short-term rates. What the US really need on refunding of the next 18 months is much more on the 5 to 10 years. And the 5 to 10 years is driven by the market. And the market expects more credibility. The more credible is the US administration, the lower the rate the market will require to buy US Treasury. So paradoxically, the more credibility the US administration will give to the Federal Reserve and to the monetary system and to the financial market, the lower the rate that will be asked to be paid. It's not putting pressure on the Fed that will have interest rate to go down. It's actually the opposite.
From London, that was the CEO of QW Capital, Mr. Gianluca Lo Befalo. Thank you very much, sir, for your insights. And back to our news, and the focus shifts to Europe, where the Deutsche Bank has become the latest major brokerage to withdraw its forecast for further European Central Bank interest rate cuts, now anticipating a rate hike by the end of 2026. This shift follows the recent tariff deal between the US and EU, which imposed a lower than threatened 15% tariff on most EU goods. Earlier, Goldman Sachs and BNP Paribas also scrapped their expectations for further ECB rate cuts this year. Deutsche Bank analysts stated that with the trade deal in place, trade policy is less of a reason for the ECB to cut policy rates further, viewing additional easing as a risk scenario. The Bank of England has revealed that British lenders approved more mortgages than expected last month, adding to signs that the housing market has recovered from a dip after the expiry of a tax break for home buyers, and consumers also upped their borrowing. Data showed that 64,167 mortgages were approved in June, up from 63,288 in May. The BOE also said that unsecured consumer borrowing increased by £1.417 billion in June.
Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully take office of President of the United States.
capital, opened the American and reciprocity.
Mexico.
Canada.
Greenland.
The Commerce Department's Census Bureau has reported that the U.S. trade deficit in goods significantly contracted in June, narrowing by 10.8% to $86 billion. This decline was primarily driven by a sharp decrease in imports. Imports of goods fell by $11.5 billion to $264.2 billion, while goods exports slipped $1.1 billion to $178.2 billion. Economists had largely expected the deficit to rise, but the unexpected contraction is bolstering expectations that trade will contribute substantially to an anticipated rebound in U.S. economic growth for the second quarter. U.S. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick has stated that President Trump was in the driver's seat on a tariff policy. Lutnick noted that the president has proven his tariff policies are exactly correct and they work. He emphasized how much South Koreans desired to finalize a deal. Lutnick also clarified that the president would consider a few deals, but primarily he would set the tariff rate for everyone by the end of the week. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has expected the new trade agreement between the EU and the US to have serious consequences for the German economy. He noted that the German economy will suffer considerable damage as a result of these tariffs. Merz described the agreed 15% tariff on exports to the US as a considerable burden, adding that he was not satisfied with the outcome reached in Scotland. He added that, however, given the difficult starting position, it was obviously not possible to achieve a better deal. Merz also expressed his belief that the tariffs would harm the US too by fueling inflation and having an overall negative impact on transatlantic trade. Ladies and gentlemen, we now go live to London, where the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer delivers a speech post-cabinet Gaza meeting.
President Trump. And on the recognition issue, you do appear to have moved your position from as recently as last week, really, where you were talking about various other measures. I'm wondering what has influenced you into making what looks like a U-turn here on this issue? Is it pressure from the 250 or so MPs, most of whom are Labour? Is it pressure from inside your cabinet? We hear there are 7 cabinet ministers pressing you to push for recognising Palestine. Or is it President Macron, who of course lobbied you? He talked about last Thursday about recognising the Palestine also at the UN General Assembly. And what difference do you think actually recognising Palestine will actually make in practical terms?
Thank you for those questions. Firstly, on the question of aid, I won't go into the discussions I had with President Trump yesterday. We had a long session in private. And we discussed the situation in Gaza, and you heard the way the President then put it in the press conference that we held afterwards. And I think you could see for yourself his concern about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, as is my concern, because we've been saying for some considerable time now we need to get more aid in at volume and at speed. And the situation now is absolutely catastrophic, which is why I've taken this decision today. In relation to the two-state solution and the recognition of Palestine, this has been long-standing Labour Party policy. It was in our manifesto. We talked about the right of the Palestinians to recognition. And we've always said that would be part of the process, and that it would be an important part of the point that we thought it would have maximum impact. It's driven today by two things. Firstly, the context in the intolerable situation in Gaza, which is getting worse by the day, but also because of the concern that the very possibility of a two-state solution is reducing, and therefore it is very important to be seen in that context as a very important contribution to what I hope will be an alleviation of the situation on the ground, because I'm acutely aware that what needs to happen urgently is that aid into Gaza at speed and at volume, and that ceasefire that can open the way for a political process. So this is a decision taken by this government in the context of today, and after a meeting with my cabinet just earlier this afternoon. On the question of the difference it will make, the reason we have announced this in the way we have in relation to the General Assembly in September is precisely because I want to ensure that this plays a part in changing the conditions on the ground, and making sure that that aid gets in, making sure that there is hope of a two-state solution for the future. And therefore, I've always been interested in what is going to make a material difference, how can we work with our allies most effectively, and that's why this comes as a part of a peace plan that we've been working on for some considerable time, an 8-part plan, which I've already spoken to Germany and France about, and many other countries. So this should be in the context of answering the question, yes, how do you get humanitarian aid in at speed and at volume, but also what happens the day after a much-needed ceasefire so that we can get to a long-term peaceful outcome. And I think that that is the context in which you should see the decision that I've made today. Can I go to David, PA, please? David.
Yeah, thanks very much, Prime Minister. David Lynch from PA. In your statement just now, you've said that the UK will recognise the state of Palestine unless Israel takes steps to end the situation in Gaza and reach a ceasefire. That sounds like our recognition of Palestine is conditional. Why is that? And how confident are you that a ceasefire can be reached by September? Well,
the primary aim here is to change the situation on the ground for people who desperately need change. We need a ceasefire. We need always to keep in our mind the hostages and the atrocity of October the 7th, and they must be immediately released. They've been held a very, very long time. But also we need, alongside that, to ensure that we get aid in at volume and in speed into Gaza, because the situation is simply intolerable. And this is intended to further that cause, and it is done now because I am particularly concerned that the very idea of a two-state solution is reducing and feels further away today than it has for many, many years, and therefore it should be seen in both of those contexts. Thank you both very much indeed.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer holding a press conference post the Gaza meeting. Now, in his statement, he stated that the UK will be supporting a two-state solution and will recognise Palestinian statehood unless Israel reaches a ceasefire deal. He was asked whether this Palestinian statehood recognition was a result of a pressure from 250 MPs, or pressure from within his own cabinet, or the decision by French President Emmanuel Macron to recognize Palestine as a state. He stated that it is his Labour Party's policy, the two-state solution and recognizing Palestinian statehood. What he aims to achieve of recognizing Palestine as a state is having a material difference to be felt and made with the situation in Gaza on the ground before the UN General Assembly meeting taking place in September. Back to our economic news, the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has signalled cautious support for a proposed 15% tariff framework, calling it sustainable as long as it factors in existing rates and shields sensitive industries like pharmaceuticals, automotive and agriculture. Meloni described the rate as sustainable but stressed the need for further work on exemptions and national support measures. She also noted that further details is still needed on certain aspects. The Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has stated that the new US tariffs on European products could cost Poland around 8 billion zlotys. On social media platform X, he wrote that the losses will be significant on both sides of the Atlantic, but a tough trade agreement is better than a senseless tariff war between allies. The Czech Finance Ministry also stated that US tariffs will slow Czech economic growth by 0.2 percentage points for the remainder of the year. Prime Minister Mark Carney has reported that talks between Canada and the United States on a trade deal are in an intense phase, reiterating that an agreement without any tariffs at all was unlikely.
The negotiations are at an intense phase. It's a complex negotiation. You see with the various trade deals that have been agreed by other jurisdictions, European Union yesterday, Japan before, Indonesia, etc., the United Kingdom, that there are many aspects to these negotiations. We're engaged in them, but the assurance for Canadian business, for Canadians, is we will only sign a deal that's the right deal, that's a good deal for Canada. We're representing Canada, we're standing up for Canada. The United States and Canada can do many good things together. We have done that in the past, we can do more in the future, but on fair terms for our country. As I say, we're standing up for Canada, Canadian interests. Of course, the United States is looking out, the President's looking out for the interests of American workers. There is a landing zone that's possible, but we have to get there, and we'll see what happens. Great. Thank you so much, Prime Minister.
Kuwait's oil minister Tariq Suleiman al-Rumi has expressed optimism about the oil market's fundamentals and that OPEC Plus efforts aim for market balance. Al-Rumi noted that Kuwait supports efforts to maintain a stable international oil market and that OPEC Plus decisions are based on market developments. He also emphasized that the meeting reflected the commitment of participating countries to the Declaration of Cooperation, which contributes to supporting global economic growth and enhancing investors' confidence in the oil market. Oil prices edged up on Tuesday on optimism that a trade war between the United States and its major trading partners was abating, and as President Donald Trump ramped up pressure on Russia over its war in Ukraine. Brent crude futures were up 0.3% at $70.26 a barrel, having touched their highest since July 18th, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude was at $66.98, up 0.4%. Global markets are seeing a mixed performance as of Tuesday evening, with European indices generally posting gains while US futures show slight declines and Asian markets present a varied picture. In the US, the S&P 500 futures declined 0.12%. Dow Jones Industrial Average futures inched down 0.38%, and Nasdaq futures decreased 0.18%. Across Europe, the UK's FTSE 100 increased by 0.65%. Germany's DAX rose 0.65% and France's CAC 40 hiked 0.66%. In Asia, the Shanghai Composite rose 0.33%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index dipped 0.15% and Japan's Nikkei 225 fell 0.79%. These are all the economic news we have for now, but here's a reminder of today's main stories. The IMF lifts the global growth forecast for 2025 and 2026. US goods trade deficit narrows by 10.8% in June. Poland and the Czech Republic anticipate an economic hit from new US tariffs. This concludes our economic bulletin for now, but please. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for watching.